In this session, we shall be discussing Mahashwetha Devi's fictional work Rudali. It's a very powerful narrative about the life of the protagonist, Shenichari, who is forced to live under circumstances which are marked by sheer poverty, helplessness, and in a way, despair. But the narrative has two distinct parts. The first part deals with the exploitation and the suffering of the protagonist, which are later explained to us as being caused by the social structures and also those aspects of society which continuously exploit the weak and the underprivileged. So the first part of this narrative is about a certain kind of victimization of a woman who represents the lowest among the low. She obviously belongs to the lowest class in society and she has tribal origins. And what we find is that apart from the social stigma attached to her being part of one of the lower classes and castes, there is also the problem of bonded labor, and this is because of the zamindari and jotedari system, which I'll be talking about later. I said there are two parts to the narrative. The first part is a very moving and disturbing description of the life of Shenichari, full of unforeseen events and incidents, and also the continuous suffering because of absolute poverty. But then the narrative takes her to a particular point where she is practically deprived of family relationships. All those who were close to her were part of the family, are either dead or they have abandoned her. She finds herself totally alone, confronting the reality of hunger and power. But that is where change takes place in her life. And the second part of our narrative, it deals with the way in which she is able to discover in herself the energy and the intelligence and the power with which she can negotiate with these very difficult social circumstances. In a way, we see the reawakening and the rebirth of the protagonist Shenichari in the second half of the narrative. Apart from telling us a very gripping and partly disturbing story of hunger and poverty, Mahashwetha Devi is also talking about the possibilities despite all these odds of circumstances, social inequality, etc. She also sees that there are possibilities of trying to first understand the circumstances. Why are there such circumstances? Who is responsible for the suffering of the so-called low caste and low class people? Who are the ones who have created such a structure of power and exploitation? So there is one part of the process of awakening where a human being becomes aware of the factors behind the social structures and the factors responsible for his or her being so helpless and deprived of even the basic things required for surviving in a human society. This is the first part of the process. The second part is learning ways of dealing with this social context. Even if you may not be able to change these social circumstances, you can learn ways of trying to negotiate with it. And ironically, what we see in this narrative is there are ways in which you can negotiate the weaknesses of those who have the power. There are possibilities of finding a small space where you can use these circumstances for your benefit. Benefit in the sense trying to find ways, first of all, of physical survival and overcoming hunger and poverty. And the second is also of arriving at some kind of power, a power which does not help you to exploit others, but a power which makes you self-sufficient and also a person who is able to help others. These are the two, I would say, narratives within the narrative called Rudali. We shall look into both these important parts of the narrative. In the first part, when you read it, you find that the language is very pared down. You don't find very literary words or images or metaphors. These are very straightforward statements, most of the time made by the author herself. You know, the entire story is told from the author's point of view, though of course Shenichari's point of view is equally important. So it is the all-knowing, omniscient author telling us the story of Shenichari and others. And the language that the author narrator uses is very bland, uh, very non-metaphorical, not containing any of the so-called figures of ornament, etc., etc. It's a straightforward, very elemental, paired to the bone style. You have clipped short sentences, but once you go on reading them, on the one hand, what you find is a very straightforward description of the life of Shenichari as she moves from one tragic incident to another, one kind of deprivation to another. But if you look closely into the language I was describing earlier, you find that there are very ironical statements which make us realize that the way Shanichari understands her own life and circumstances is very different from the way in which the author can analyze those situations and circumstances. There is, of course, a very powerful use of irony in both the sections. What happens in the first section of the narrative? We are told that Shanichari belongs to a particular village, and this is a village where most of the workers and the laborers, they belong to two tribes. One could describe them as two tribes. At least there is an indication that there is a tribal origin to the so-called caste groups to which they belong. She belongs to one of them, and therefore it's like the destiny of anyone, man or woman, born in the so-called low caste or low class, to confront, first of all, poverty. The entire life of these people is a struggle to find the next meal. It's a struggle to find a little of security and shelter. In that sense, Shenichari is of course an individual, and later we are going to see her that she is a complex and a very sensitive individual also. But in the first section, she is a type, and she is a representative of the exploited human being in a society of this kind. Let's ask ourselves, what kind of a society is this? Throughout this narrative, here and there, all those details of the makeup, the structure of this society are introduced by the author. What we see is that at the tip, at the highest level of the society, are the zamindars and the jotedars who belong to the many Rajput clans. Jotedar here would mean one who is also able to lend money and conduct these financial, transactions. Whereas a zamindar is one who owns land, and here it is the landlords, the zamindars, who have also now become jotedars. In the sense, first of all, they control the means of production, if you want to use a term taken from Marx. This is a predominantly agricultural, rural society, though there are some details given about a nearby town, etc. The society itself is basically agrarian. Agriculture is the major means of production, and actually the entire economy depends on land, and the class which owns the land is the master class. Here it is the class of the jotedars and the zamindars. They were told later, especially in the shorter narratives and stories provided to us by Dulan, who knows much more than the others belonging to the working class. If we bring here the later details given by Dulan in the work, we see that Dulan is right in pointing out that the entire class of the Jamindars and the Jotedars were able to occupy large tracts of land, primarily because they were gifted by the local king. Secondly, because they claimed that the land was required for the gods, goddesses, and the deities. And thirdly, by usurping the land, by giving loans which required very unjust, cruel, bonded labor for years. Many times it also meant that the property belonging to the small patches belonging to the peasants and the workers would also be usurped by the Zamindar class. Therefore, those like Shanichari and her husband and her relations, they constitute numerically a large class, but they have absolutely no right of any kind except for some bits and pieces of land which have come down uh, by inheritance, or bits of pieces of land which may have been in a way acquired. Other than that, they have absolutely no claim over the land in which they work, which they till, which they majorly contribute for growing crops, etc. They do not have any privileges in society. They are considered inferior. Thirdly, there is the exploitation through the mode of bonded labor, as we see in the novel, when Shanichari is forced to borrow money from the Jotedar because she has to organize a funeral feast. Well, she borrows money, and the consequence is she has to become a bonded laborer for about 5 years for a paltry sum of about 20 rupees, to which the interest of 30 rupees is added on, and then she has to work for those 5 years. This is how uh, one way of exploitation is that they are landless workers and laborers with no property of their own and no legal protection against the slavery of becoming bonded laborers. The third is the sexual exploitation of the women, which becomes again a dominant theme in the second part of the narrative. We are told that the Jyotidas and the Jamindars sexually exploited, especially the young girls and young women, and after using them, they abandoned them so that some of them became the orphaned, neglected women of the society, and many of them, out of sheer helplessness, had to become prostitutes in the red light, area of the nearby town and maybe the other cities also. In this also, the women are absolutely helpless because they have no legal remedy and there is nobody to protect them. And there is, of course, the powerful patriarchy. Each one of the Jotedar and Jamindar is a patriarch, a dominant male who believes that women are only objects, either for working without any wages or for providing sexual gratification to them. We do see a number of such young girls and women in the novel. This is the wide network of exploitation in which especially the women of the village are caught. And the entire community has taken it for granted that this system of exploitation cannot be changed. It's like the order of nature, like the will of God, against which you are helpless, you can't do anything. Now, in the context of this social framework, you find Shanichari, who has absolutely no understanding of the context itself. This is something which the fiction tells us very powerfully, that the exploited, victimized individual herself is not aware of the factors of exploitation of what I have very briefly described until now. Shanichari would think that it is a part of her fate, and her mother-in-law, who is the first one to die in the family, um, she has been telling her that Shanichari, as her name tells us, was born on a Saturday, which is supposed to be a day of ill omen, an inauspicious day. And the mother-in-law attributes all the bad things which have happened to her, happened to Shanichari, as because of the inauspicious day on which she was born. So Shanichari, in the first part of the work, takes it for granted that it is her fate and she is born to suffer. She first sees the death of her mother-in-law, who has been very cruel to her and who has in her own way exploited her and humiliated her. But her death itself has been very painful. And what we find at the moment when the death of the mother-in-law takes place, it repeats later also. Somehow on these occasions of death, Shanichari finds herself absolutely helpless in the absence of the male members of the family. And on two important occasions, the male members, for example, her husband and later her son, they are missing again because of the Jyotidar himself. On one occasion, all the males of these lower castes and classes have been rounded up by the police on the instruction of the Jotedar, because it is suspected that they are responsible for a crime or a theft. On another occasion, a similar excuse has been found. We'll also see that the legal system and police system, which may not appear but which very much there behind all these events, is totally with the exploitative class. It is with the zamindar and the jotedar class, and it has nothing to give by way of protection to Shanichari and the others. So the mother-in-law dies, and Shanichari is required to arrange the funeral for the mother-in-law, and the problem is that there is no money. That's why I use the word absolute poverty. Very little money is required to organize a very small funeral ritual and feast, because the people are understanding. I want to bring that in here, because one very positive thing is that the village community, despite jealousies and all those problems, is very supportive when one of the members finds herself in a crisis. So with the help of the village community, she is able to organize a very hasty funeral and a small ritual and a feast. Um, Thereafter, we find, in the absence of the mother-in-law, there is some happiness, very short-lived, um, temporary happiness in the life of Shanichari, because her husband, who seems to be a very hard-working individual, who has inherited a very small patch which can become a kitchen garden for their hut. He is, in his own way, very sympathetic and understanding. And when he realizes that with the very hard work put in by Shanichari, they are able to make their dwelling a little comfortable, and there's hope that part of what they grow can be sold later. It doesn't happen right now, but it happens later. Because of that, he feels that the gods are happy with them, and he asks Shanichari to join him on a trip to a temple by the side of a river during a fair where the holy worship is also organized. And this is where the unfortunate event takes place, and you should carefully look into the description. The wealthy people have been offering milk to worship the deities and the images of the gods there, and this milk is poured over the statues and the idols, and it is collected in a very stinking small little tank, and this is supposed to be prasad, the holy leftover, and the husband of Shanichari drinks this, and he is affected by cholera, which is very rampant, and he dies of that. And once again, Shanichari is helpless, all alone in this other place, not her village. And by using a local priest, she once again organizes a very quick and very small death ritual, and also gives a small gift to the priest. But when she comes back to her village after the death ritual here, the local priest insists that that's not enough. The funeral has to be held here and the ritual has to be held here with a feast. This is a very difficult thing for Shanichari. Here we see one more system of exploitation of which women like Shanichari are victims. This is the priest class, which on the one hand, as we see later in the novel, supports the wealthy class, takes a lot of gifts and money from them, and ignores the sins and even the crimes committed by the upper wealthy class. But the same priestly class insists upon the poor people spending on these meaningless rituals. So it is under these circumstances that Chanichari is forced to borrow, and she borrows money, and this makes her now a bonded laborer apart from being a widow, and she has a son on whom she has to depend. Once again, if you look at these patterns, the ups and downs in the life of Shanichari, we find one more brief period of some happiness in her life. The word happiness has to be used very carefully here. It's not a freedom or autonomy, but a little of compassion, cooperation that comes to Shanichari, this time from her son, who is again a very sympathetic, understanding, hardworking person. He is the one who uses that small patch of the land around that hut and creates a garden where he grows vegetables, and these vegetables can be sold, and that adds to the very meager income. He is now troubled by two disasters. One is that he begins to suffer from tuberculosis because of the very unhealthy conditions in which he works for the Jotedar. He begins to lose his vitality and health. The other is his marriage to a young woman who happens to be not the right companion for him. Her problems are that she is extremely greedy, and she is a glutton, and she's all the time looking for food, and she doesn't have any scruples when it is a question of finding food, and she's also not um, very strict when it comes to the so-called morals, etc. We find her later running away and eloping with an entertainer who comes to the village. But let me also say right here that she's not presented here as a very villainous person uh, who is immoral, etc. She is shown to be irresponsible, but later in the narrative, we see that Shanichari herself understands that she, her daughter-in-law, is also exploited because she is a woman, and because she belongs to this low class and caste. Okay, the son also dies, and then the daughter-in-law will promise to stay back, be with the family. She's already been going around the market and being attracted and lured away by the pleasures. Well, the son dies, and then she has given birth to a male child, and then she disappears, runs away. Actually, on the day the husband dies, she leaves and she goes away. Thereafter, we find Shanichari once again deprived of a relationship. She lost her husband, she lost her son, and she has been abandoned by the daughter-in-law, and she has only her grandson. And once again, there is a brief period where Shanichari tries to bring up her grandson with all her love and affection, and also with some discipline. And then when he grows up into a young man, he wants something outside this restricted home and the village. And he is given a small job in a shop, but thereafter, lured away once again by the pleasures of the town and the city, he goes away and he disappears. So the last of the links with the family is now severed for Shenichari. In between, she has also lost her brother-in-law and sister-in-law. One could say that until this point in the narrative, what we see is a continuous tragic process by which Shanichari loses everything that she has. The familial support, good or bad, does not matter. Then she is already a bonded laborer, and she was dreaming of a little happiness with herself and her grandchild. This is also lost forever, and it looks as though she is now at the very bottom of a dark existence where there is poverty, bonded labor, she is all alone, she is a widow with nobody to support. This is where the major change in the narrative comes to an end. I'll talk about it in the second part of my talk. Welcome back to the second part of my talk on Mahashwetha Devi's Rudali. In the first part, I had discussed the depiction of the life of Shenichari up to the point where she finds herself all alone with no support at all and not knowing how she is going to live and how she is going to survive. I had mentioned in the first part that it is the village community which comes to the support of the individual during a crisis. As the author narrator tells us, the people of the village may be mean-minded, or they may not come together to fight against exploitation, but in their own small way, they come out with help when one of their neighbors is caught up in a crisis, as Shenichari, for example, finds herself now. The help to Shenichari comes from Dulan and his wife. Dulan is an extraordinary character. In fact, you would find such a character only in the plays of Bertolt Brecht, or maybe in certain narratives which talk about the subaltern rebel. I want to explain these two terms. Like Shenichari, Dulan also belongs to the lower class and the lower caste. But he is gifted with the intelligence through which he understands the society. You know, in Marxist terms, the problem with those who are exploited is that they do not understand the real economic factors which lead to their exploitation. And in some kind of illusion, they either blame it on their karma or fate or their birth in an inauspicious moment. But there are people like Dulan who belong to the exploited class, but they are aware of the factors which have led to this exploitation. Dulan has by now developed a very close understanding of how his society operates. He has done this by looking into the exploitative class of the Jamindars and the Jotedars. He knows all the scandals of these so-called powerful, wealthy families. He knows the squabbling and the quarrels which go on. He knows about the rivalries among these families. He also knows how these wealthy men have been sexually exploiting women and throwing them away and forcing them to prostitution. He also knows the false sense of prestige they have. In fact, as we go on looking at the Jotedar and Jamindar class, from the narrative and the interpretation given by Dulan, we find that the portrayal is absolutely negative. This is a class of highly self-centered individuals who have no scruples and no morals and no ethics of any kind. They are willing not only to inhumanly exploit and destroy the lower classes, but do the same with the competitors from their own class. They are continuously caught in these legal squabbles against one another, and they're always waiting for an opportunity to grab property, etc., belonging to another member of their class. The sexual morals are just not there at all. Most of them, as Dulan knows, suffer from venereal diseases, and we see that at least two of the deaths in this narrative of the so-called respectable elderly members of this class are also caused by sexual diseases and the venereal diseases because of the highly libertine life that they have led. So this part where Dulan becomes the interpreter for us allows us to see the negative aspect of this exploitative class, which is in power, which has such absolute power over the underprivileged, but it is a sick class where family relationships are not respected. For example, we have an example of a son who does not want to spend a single paise to treat his mother, but is already planning a huge, expensive funeral procession for her. There are many such examples which we see through the eyes of Dulan, and this is one major part of the second section. I think it is very clear in the section that Mahashwetha Devi has no illusions about this class. She shows it to be a dehumanized class with no values, with no family values, and no social commitment. Money is the only language, and the other is sexual gratification. But Dulan also knows the weaknesses, and the weaknesses are, first of all, a false sense of pride, saying that they belong to a very ancient clan, etc. And the second one is this false sense of prestige. The dark humor in the second part of the narrative is that these people are unable to shed a tear for the dear ones who have died in the family. Therefore, they hire by paying money Rudalis. The Rudalis are the professional weepers and mourners. In this case, it is women like Chenichari and also the prostitutes who are brought here for the occasion. But they want a grand feast, an expensive feast, with the priests taking away large gifts and a procession where the dead person is very loudly mourned, not by them, but by the hired Rudalis, etc. This is a weakness which has been studying as though he is a doctor or a surgeon. It is this family which first comes to the help of the hapless Chenichari. First of all, it is the wife of Dulan who helps Chenichari by telling her about a job in the construction of the rail line where she can earn wages and therefore survive. That's the first thing. She also offers to look after the child. I mean, we are going back in time here. She also offers to do that, bring up the grandchild, and that is what has sustained Shanichari after the abandonment by the daughter-in-law until the grandchild grows up. But now that the grandson has run away, she once again needs the help and succor from the Dulan family. And this time when she goes to Dulan, Dulan makes her an offer which first puzzles her and shocks her, and then she is made to accept it. But in between these two major events, one whole section of the narrative is again about a brief period of happiness in the life of Shanichari. She accidentally meets Bikini, who was her friend and companion in the days past. And Bikini's story is parallel to Shanichari's story. She has given away everything to her son, but the son now has abandoned her to be a part of his in-laws family, and also taken away um, the herd of animals which belong to the family. And two of them now, old women, when they meet and confront each other, they find that they are absolutely in the same position. All family relationships more or less lost, um, and at least Bikini has a bit of savings, and Shanichari has nothing. And the two of them come together. This should be treated as an important part of the second section, because this is about the bonding of two women exploited in different ways by their families and societies. But it is not a story any longer of weeping and then mourning. The two of them come together and they are able to discover that they can live together by using the skills and the energy that they have, and together they are able to clean up the little home and start growing things, and Bikini becomes the one who goes around, establishes relationships with a village where she is not born, and she is also able to go to the marketplace. So Shanichari at this point is still a homebound person. Her whole life is built around her home and her work. The two of them, they are leading their life of some independence, and they discover that perhaps they are more free now, more independent, more happy than they were in the so-called familial relationships. They are now, to put it bluntly, without a family and therefore free and happy. They have they have micro family of the two. They are sisters in a way. They are women with a bond of understanding and affection. But two things once again upset the balance here. The first is the one I was talking about. Once the little saved money is over, what should they do for their sustenance? This is when they go to Dulan, and Shanichari and Bikini are told by Dulan about the wealthy rich class, but then also the possibility, and he says that they can become professional mourners, and what it requires is on the occasion or even before the funeral rites begin, they have to approach the family and make a contract for the money and the food, and their job would be to be a part of the procession, loudly mourning the death of the dead person of the family and also singing the praises of the dead person. The irony is not lost upon the readers. We were told in the first part that The one thing that Shanichari could not do, was not allowed to do because of the circumstances, was to shed a single tear for her husband, son, and the abandonment by the daughter-in-law and her grandson. Um, Now she finds herself that she has to become someone who can shed tears profusely, because the tears now are the means of earning a livelihood. With all that puzzled feeling, she becomes a professional mourner with bikini, and fortunately their performance is so good that from that time onwards they are invited everywhere, and that is where they now begin to collect information under the instructions of Rulan about the impending death of people in these families and arrangements for the funeral. And this makes Chenichari for the first time to come out of her home, to look at the world, to understand the world, and also find out how you can earn your living by using this, by manipulating the circumstances, the false prestige, for example, of the exploitative class. So she now becomes a professional and independent earner, breadwinner, along with her friend. But unfortunately, Bikini, who goes away to attend a marriage where she is hoping that she can meet her son, dies there of her disease, and the news is brought to Shenichari. This, one could say, should have been the last straw, because a friend, companion, in a way, guide into the outside world is now dead. But by this time, there has been this development in her, where she has gradually overcome a feeling of helplessness and weakness, and now she is autonomous. She is a free individual, able to take her decisions, able to handle a society without becoming a victim. And in the very last part of the novel, she has to go to the red light area to hire the services of the prostitutes for a huge funeral procession in the village. They have already seen her as a professional mourner. And what happens here is something very, very interesting. The helpless victim, Shenichari, now becomes a leader. Very ironically, she is already starting the union of the professional mourners, telling all those prostitutes who are going to work as mourners that they should demand certain things, they should demand certain amount of food, etc., etc. Though it is not said in these words, she is now establishing the union of the exploited women. Something amazing if you look at what Shenichari was in the first part. That's what I had said earlier. The work also talks about these possibilities, limited possibilities. A single Shenichari cannot change this exploitative class structure. What she can do is survive, first of all. Find a means of surviving here, even if it means, in a way, exploiting, making use of the weaknesses of the very classes which have exploited her earlier. So, one important thing that happens is, as she knows, her daughter-in-law is also now a prostitute, and she convinces her that she should also be a part of the professional Rudali is, and brings her here to the village. The story ends with an extraordinary description of one young girl who was very inhumanly exploited and humiliated. She now comes back and partly takes her revenge, as it were, by uh, by winking at one of the members of the wealthy class. The work doesn't talk about open rebellion, etc. But what it talks about is the extraordinary possibility of an ordinary, very low class individual woman gradually beginning to be aware of what society is in her own way, not theoretically, and also finding some way of helping women who are exploited in different ways. And that is one reason why this great work by Mahashwetha Devi has found a very large readership and so much of critical attention. Those are the comments I wanted to make on this work. Thank you.